Welcome back to Zero Sum Gaming here at the Culture Cache. 2016 has been a very strange year so far. I just got another request. This one comes from the Power Trip. He's the Culture Cache's resident king of comic books, and you should check out some of his videos after this one. For now, let's check out what he sent in. Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse for the NES. Did he somehow know that this is my favorite series in all of gaming?
Castlevania is one of those rare series in gaming that just almost always seems to get it right. Yeah, there are a few stinkers in the lineup, but they're generally not terrible, and only seem so because they're compared with other games in such a renowned franchise. It'd be like if you were one of Donald Trump's 4 siblings. You could be a successful federal judge, honored by even Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, but with a huge brother worth over $4 billion, odds are that most people still won't know your name. Castlevania games usually have great thematic graphics. Keep in mind that this game came out in 1990. When judging a game's look, you always have to consider what graphical capabilities were at that time. Sprites are about as detailed as could have been expected for the day, even if Trevor has no face. The colors are appropriately dark and provide the game with the characteristic atmosphere. And a hallmark of this series is that enemies usually have spectacular death animations. Or is that re-death animations? Either way, you'll appreciate them. Music is the lifeblood of this series, and for the record, I would have said that whether or not vampirism was an important aspect of this game. Like Dracula himself, the audio has to provide a sense of opulence and danger, of elegance and malice. Growing up, I logged hundreds of hours with this game. Many of them were spent simply allowing the hidden sound test to fill my bedroom with all the aural glory this game so deftly delivers. In fact, this was the first video game I was aware of to actually bother naming each audio track, instead of simply naming each piece Stage 1 Music or something like that. I know it wasn't the actual first, but it's the first one I knew. Many pieces of music that debuted in this game have been reused in other games decades later, and frankly, there's a reason for that. Treat your ears to some of this 8-bit goodness. This is getting away from the game for just a bit, but please indulge me. The tone this series establishes extends well beyond the games themselves. The prevailing darkness, mixed with obvious Christianity and a Japanese take on European culture, often extends into the swag related to these games as well. I have zero doubt what a profound impact this series' art style has had in shaping my personal tastes. But it too was shaped in turn. Take a good look at the US box art for the first game. Now check out The Norseman by the late Frank Frazetta. Yup, his work has actually shaped popular depictions of the entire fantasy genre. In fact, if you remember my Black Tiger video, the look of that game was inspired by this same painting. And if you don't remember my Black Tiger video, the look of that game was still inspired by The Norseman. Even Gauntlet drew some inspiration from his work. Of course, if we're talking about Castlevania influences, I'd certainly be remiss to leave out the movies. While the series has gotten away from this, the earliest entries were not at all shy about nods to famous films, and this game is no exception. All 3 NES games even go so far as to portray the games as classic horror flicks. Note the film perfs clearly present in the introductions of all 3 games. And these movie references are much more than simply cosmetic. Many famous horror movie villains, especially from the Universal and Hammer Studios, are present in Castlevania. Take a look. Naturally, like any good movie series, each separate Castlevania game leads its own distinct story that fits into part of the overarching narrative. The simplified version of it is that every 100 years, Dracula returns from the dead, and it's up to the Belmont family to send him back to the crypt. Granted, when a series is as long-running as this one, there are bound to be discrepancies, but that's to be expected. Hey, it's not as bad as Metal Gear's timeline, or worse, Zelda's. At the time this game came out, it was the first entry in terms of chronology. Obviously, it hasn't stayed that way. Still, the story is deeper than you'd expect from an NES action game. Wallachia feared the Belmont family's power, and so banished them. Dracula began ravishing the countryside, so the people turned to the church, which promptly hired a small band of vampire hunters. But they failed. Running out of options, the people turned to Trevor Belmont to save them. And wouldn't you know it, but that's who you play as. So let's get to know him a little better. Trevor behaves as many Castlevania main characters do. He wields the Vampire Killer, a mystical whip passed down by his ancestors. He is strong, but slow. He has more sub-weapons at his disposal than any other character. It's this trait that makes him the most flexible character. Trevor must always be one of your characters. Characters? Plural? Yup. In a series first, there are multiple playable characters in Dracula's Curse. One of them is Grant. No, not that one. Tempting, but no. There you go. This is Grant Dynasty. He's a subtle nod to the real-life House of Dynasty that was deposed by the actual Vlad III Dracula. In fact, the real-life Vlad Tepes died the very same year this game takes place. Konami did its homework. Granted, this game is a fictionalized account of already fictionalized historical events, but how cool is it that you can trace this game back to real life? Okay, let's get back to the game. What's Grant like? He's incredibly fast and maneuverable. He can climb on walls and ceilings, and you can use this to create shortcuts or interesting and unorthodox boss strategies. He's fast enough to trap many strong enemies in a cycle of hit stun and stab them enough to make even Lizzie Borden blush. Actually, she used a hatchet, and for that matter, she was found not guilty, but you get the idea. Just be careful with him, because his hits are weak and he takes a lot of damage when he gets hit. Nevertheless, Grant's my favorite character to play as. He can use axes and daggers just like Trevor. Next up, we have Al. Wrong Al. God, no. I like what I'm seeing here, but let's stick to Dracula's son. You know what I mean! Although that picture of Lon Chaney Jr. wasn't totally off base. He played Alucard in Son of Dracula, and it was the first time we saw a vampire transform into a bat on screen. Fittingly, Castlevania 3 Alucard can also change into a bat. While this is very costly in terms of your hearts, it can save your life from falls that are normally fatal, as well as create some amazing shortcuts. Unfortunately, Alucard is also the weakest character in terms of dealing damage. The only times I've ever run out of time in this game, I was playing as Al. He can take a hit well, but he's also the largest target. His only sub-weapon option is the stopwatch. Finally, we come to Sypha.
Get on with it. Yes, get on with it!
Oh, I'm enjoying this scene.
Get on with it!
Sypha's name is derived from the word cipher. Spoilers for a 25-year-old game. This is appropriate because she's actually female. She's one of the vampire hunters hired by the church before the game takes place, but she's unable to complete her mission because she gets turned to stone. She's a wizard who commands the elements in lieu of sub-weapons. This can make her a potent boss killer. She also attacks quickly, but she's physically weak and has very little range. If planning and balance that went into crafting these characters is impressive. Notice that Grant and Alucard offer ease through the levels, while Sypha devastates bosses. Trevor fits somewhere in the middle. Even though you are required to have Trevor at all times, you'd still want him as one of your two characters if he wasn't. He complements each of the other three characters extremely well. For example, if you're playing with Grant, you'll probably want to load Trevor up with holy water and a triple shot and use him to take on the bosses while using Grant and his axes to get through the stages. Conversely, if you instead opt for Sypha, Trevor should take the axe to negotiate the levels, while Sypha's role is that of boss slayer. So this, naturally, begs the question, which of the three other characters should you pick? You'll want to try them all out and see who you like best, then make up your own mind. The layouts of the levels is the same no matter who you choose, but how you go through them can be radically different. Which character to take as your companion isn't the only choice you'll have to make, though. You'll come across 3 junction points where you get to select your path. There are a total of 15 levels in the game, but depending on the route you take, you'll end up only seeing 9 or 10 of them. As a rule of thumb, whenever you're confronted with a choice, the top path tends to be easier than the bottom one. These quandaries greatly contribute to the replayability of the game. You can take the easiest course through the game with either Grant or Sypha, while the middle and hardest paths allow for Grant or Alucard. Or you can really go balls to the wall and leave your companions behind, venturing forth through any of the thoroughfares with Trevor alone. Yeah, good luck with that, especially if you take the lower route. But if you want to experience all that this game has to offer, you're going to have to tackle it with only Trevor at some point. This game has 4 endings, one for Trevor solo, and one for each of the other 3 characters. Simply put, this game is hard. There's a well-known way to start the game with 10 lives. Just enter "Help Me" as the name of your character. Yup, they knew how difficult they made this game. And I'm not a bit ashamed to say that I literally always use that name when I play. Even then, most people will never make it through this one. While you normally die in 4 to 8 hits, it's also very easy to lose your footing, resulting in a quick death. Both the levels and bosses will test your abilities. In fact, in one level, you must fight 4 different bosses, 3 of which are right in a row. The game actually starts pretty easy. Just about anybody can beat the first level or 2. Soon after that, though, you'll start to feel the heat. This is the type of game you'll really have to master in order to make progress. But that's a large part of the fun. You really do feel immense satisfaction whenever you finally manage to defeat your own clone or whatever part of the game has stymied you for so long. But if you're willing to brave it, you'll find an incredibly rich and rewarding gameplay experience. It's deliberately paced for an action game. This means you really have to get to know the attack patterns of your enemies. You're also committed once you make a jump. You can't leap to the right and then land to the left, for example, unless you're playing as Grant. Occasionally you'll find people who criticize this, but it's an intentional design decision, much like Trevor's slow but powerful cracks of the whip are. The atmosphere and action meld in such a way as to deliver true gaming nirvana. Strangely, the North American version of this game is remarkably different from its Japanese counterpart. And I'm not just talking about the fact that Trevor's name was originally Ralph. For starters, the music took a slight hit. The Japanese one has a specialized chip to help add a few sound channels. Listen to just how different they are. because I like you a lot, I'll take off my nostalgia goggles for just a sec. Don't get used to that. Yeah, even I will have to admit that the Japanese version is definitely of a higher quality. Having said that, because I grew up with the US version, and I'm just so used to hearing those tracks, as a purely personal preference, I choose to listen to the domestic version of the soundtrack a bit more often. Either way, both of them set an incredibly high bar for what music the NES/Famicom is capable of producing. Another huge change to our localized version has to do with the damage you take. In our version, the farther you get in the game, the more damage you take per hit. This actually seems to be the gameplay fitting the narrative, as Dracula's curse appears to get stronger as Trevor gets progressively closer to its spawn. It's a unique aspect of video games that can't be fully realized by any other media. But the Japanese source material is totally different, with each separate attack dealing a set amount of damage per hit for the duration of the game. While this does make the beginning of the game slightly more difficult, it makes the final 3 stages worlds easier. In fact, the Japanese version is easier in a few other ways as well. If you die while fighting Dracula, you have to replay half of the last stage before attempting the battle again. In the Japanese one, you get to start your next life right at it. But even more importantly, Grant Dynasty was much more useful before the game was localized for our shores. He used to deploy the functional equivalent of Trevor's throwing dagger sub-weapon as his primary attack. This means he basically has infinite free uses of a ranged attack. Even in the US version, he's my favorite, so just imagine when I play the JP one.
Is Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse worth it? Yep. And notice I didn't give you the price yet. It goes for about $27, and it is worth even that price for the NES. But if you don't mind going digital, you can purchase it through the Virtual Console service on the Wii, Wii U, or 3DS for only $5. This is a challenging game, but it's that very challenge that keeps you coming back for more all the time. Thanks for watching.
Don't you just love how all the other characters use their hands to open doors, but Grant uses his face?